Couples in sync tend to walk either like this together or like this together. Yeah? I could ejaculate 3 times with this new relationship and blah, blah, blah. And then once we moved in together, well, now we're having sex once a week. You can hypnotize people to have orgasms. An orgasm is a state that your brain learns when you have the first few of them.
Welcome back to the Rena Malik MD podcast, your source for evidence-based information about your sexual health and more. I'm your host, Dr. Rena Malik, urologist and pelvic surgeon. Today, I'm thrilled to be joined by Dr. Jim Faust, a world-renowned neuroscientist and professor at Charles University in Prague. His groundbreaking research on sexual behavior and brain chemistry has redefined how we understand sexual desire. In this episode, we talk about how early pleasure experiences can program your brain's template for attraction, how dopamine drives attraction and creates an obsession with your new partner, why post-orgasm cuddling might be the most crucial for bonding, and how oxytocin creates post-orgasmic learning. We explore whether hookup culture changes your neurochemistry and your ability to form deep connections. We also talk about the science of sexual synchrony and how semen retention changes your brain. I truly enjoyed this conversation, and I hope you will too. I want to talk to you about brains and how our brain looks at something or sees something and interprets it as sexually attractive, and how you see that and then become motivated to pursue it for sex or any sort of romantic entanglement.
The brain is actually processing several things at once, and it's got to move you from distal to proximal to interactive. So it's got an enormous number of things it has to accomplish. Even though for us, we don't even think about it, we just do it, right? Which is great. There's a zen, of course, in all of that. But what's interesting is that the brain has to be able to see something at a distance and say, okay, that is attractive to me. May not be attractive to my best friend, but that's why we're best friends. So it's attractive to me. I'm going to go pursue. Now, how am I going to pursue? I'm going to do whatever I can do to move closer. And that engages what's called your dopamine system. And it engages it in such a way that it's kind of combining your motivation and your action together, right? Because that's really what dopamine controls. It's not reward or pleasure per se, but it's really kind of the motivation to go towards something that's pleasurable or to move away from something that's not pleasurable, right? That's actually going to be, destructive to you, right? So you engage the system, and that system is connected not only, to your emotional brain, but it's also connected to your frontal lobe. And why is that important? Because you got to be able to do the right things and say the right things and act the right way, depending on the culture, of course, right? But to do that in such a way that you don't make the other person run away, make the other person reject you. So, you have to have some social skills, or you just know how to, swipe right or left. But you still have to have the social skills to be able to do that and to be able to pick out at that distance the features that you're attracted to. Now, what are those features? Some of them are laid down, right? They're not imprinted at all. They're completely laid down. We're attracted to bodies. We're attracted to things on the body, secondary sex characteristics that are on the body, right? It doesn't matter whether you're gay, straight, bi, whatever. You're attracted to things on that body unconditionally. But then you've got the conditional part of it, which is based on your experience. So the brain is very much an experience-dependent organ, right? And your experience starts to lay down or imprint features that you find attractive. And these features run the gamut. They span ethnicity, they span sex and gender, they span a whole bunch of different things, but then they span like small little differences in the facial structure, in the body type, in the hair color, you can imagine all these things, you could decompose them. And you've got kind of a template. John Money used to call it a love map, but you have a template of these features that simply get added to as you live your life as a sexual being. You start to add on to it. Oh, well, this feature I'm always attracted to that feature. I have a type. I have a personality type as well. So once you've gone from distal to proximal to interactive, now you can talk to this person. Does a person make you laugh? Is a person into you? You can get these senses of these things. And as long as all that gets met, you start to mesh. And that also continues to activate your dopamine system to the point that when you're actually finally having sex, the system is turned on to the max. And it's also presumably turned on to the partner to the max. And you start getting the activation of synchrony, of synchronous behaviors, and that evolves more and more and more, which also activates your dopamine system and activates, what are called mirror neurons in the hippocampus. So you touch your hair, he touches his hair. You start to show this synchrony, right? And that synchrony tells your brain that this works. So you can move on to the next stage. And there's nothing more synchronous than two bodies having sex, really. I mean, if they're into each other, you're feeling what he or she is feeling, they're feeling what you're feeling, and you're both moving in such a way that you move on and on and on to some pleasurable endpoint. So the brain has to organize all that. And the pleasure, which is produced by opioids and serotonin, which are emitted at orgasm, for example, they come back to reinforce not only and sensitize not only your dopamine system, but they also sensitize your oxytocin systems so that now you personify that reward in this template of what you find attractive.
There's so many little bits and pieces. So one is you mentioned that your experience helps condition your, what you find desirable. And I know that you've done some work on the first sexual experience, at least in animal models, the first sexual experience and how that really plays into how you're conditioned for future sexual experiences. So let's unpack that a little bit for the audience and maybe talk about how that is in humans.
The problem with humans, of course, is that there's no way to study this because you'd have to be around during their first experiences. So you really have to rely on the accuracy of people's retrospection. Like, how well do you remember that first experience? But it's not only a first experience, because some first experiences can be terrible, or they can just be like, what, this is it? This is what sex is. But it's the first experience with pleasure, with your own intense pleasure, because pleasure really marks the brain. So does trauma. But pleasure has a big marker on the brain as well, right? When you you don't know what chocolate tastes like till you taste it. And then once you taste it, you've tagged it now. Your brain knows what that is, and you'll move toward it when you see it, right? You'll just it almost feels like, well, I was naturally supposed to move toward chocolate because chocolate makes me feel that way. But it's not natural. You can not have chocolate for your entire life and probably be fine because you have other things that are pleasurable. You know what I mean? So your first experiences with pleasure are the things that are really important. If female rats, for example, have their first experiences in a chamber that doesn't give them pleasure, that doesn't allow them to, say, control the initiation and the rate of copulation with a male, which they really like to do, and when they can do it, they really like it, well, then they don't like it, right? And if you give them enough experience that way, you could even put them into a chamber that allows them to do that, but then they show a lot of fighting. They show a lot of rejection responses. It's like, oh God, this again, I'm not into it. Whereas if their first experiences are quite pleasurable, then they are into it. And in fact, you can put them in a less opportune chamber, for example, that doesn't let them do that, but they still like sex. It's almost like having good sex makes bad sex not less bad, but it really allows you to differentiate. Whereas if you've only had bad sex, you make an interpretation that good sex is probably still going to be bad, right? And that I think, unfortunately, I think a lot of human females have that experience. Right. And so with males, it's the same kind of thing. And what you can add on top of that, what our experiments have shown, is that, if we give a neutral odor, put that on the partner, the first experiences, you put a jacket on the partner, the first experiences, and then you give them a choice in an open field with two partners, one that smells familiar and one that smells different. And they work against what we think is their natural biology. Well, we hear this, oh, well, males want to have a new female every time. Okay. So and certainly for rats, that'll be true unless you make something unequal. So when everything is equal, sure, pick a different one every time. But when it's not equal, i.e. you have one that you now have, I'm not going to say fallen in love with because they're rats, but one that you definitely now bears a cue that predicts the reward, they go after that one. And so they kind of violate their biology, But to me, that's not really a violation of the biology. That's just the brain being the brain and saying, well, I know this one. I don't know that one. This one gives me pleasure. That one might not give me pleasure. So who do I choose? And the males, of course, make a mate choice because they choose to ejaculate with that female. The females actually are much more choosy. So at this distance, they will go after the male. They'll stay with that male. And they'll kind of, I don't know, do this nasty little game where they run away from the male, run by the other male, and then go back to their preferred male. So that poor male is like, he's wearing a tether. He's at the end of his tether grabbing at the female, but he can't get her because she's too quick. That's what Darwin would have suggested. The females are more choosy, right? They're going to have to, rats don't read books. There's no way that they know what's coming, right? And, these females, we've taken their ovaries out, so they're not going to make babies. We can get the same thing with their ovaries in, as long as the steroid priming is the right way. So it's like, this is the brain showing plasticity, showing, the idea that you're not locked in any one particular way of doing something. You're locked in a way that says, well, world, tell me what's out there. Give me the experience so that I can make a judgment. And in that way, rats are no different from people. We probably end up building that, right, over time. So how do you know you have a type? You just know because you see people that are similar and you go, oh, that's a really attractive person, right? It doesn't mean you're going to do anything with that person, but you know what's attractive to you. And I think that's what happens. We build this type and met in several different kind of levels of analysis.
Yeah, so you brought up this interesting point that like people figure out, for example, people who've never had good sex, they may not even really enjoy sex or go seeking sex because they've only known bad sex. So how does one sort of like work through that? Like, is this sort of the basis for asexuality? Like those people who've had really bad sexual experiences or tried to have sex and just really never enjoyed it, are they just doomed?
No, I don't think they're doomed. I think it's like one of those things, like, our brain is always making comparisons. Okay, is this as good as last time? I go for my favorite meal. Was it as good as last time? Oh, it wasn't. Oh, they must have a different chef. You're always making comparisons, and I think we scale things based on those comparisons. So imagine that you think, in your 20s, you think, oh, I know what a 10 is. I know what a 10 is. I really do. And then you have an experience that just blows your mind in your 30s. And you're like, oh, I thought I knew what a 10 was. But now what I thought a 10 was is really a 6 because I had this mind-blowing experience. And you do this throughout your lifespan. So you're constantly changing the scale based on your experience. And I think if everything has been bad and you have low desire because of that, because your prediction is, I'm just a life support system. In the case of women, for example, because I think this happens more in women than men, where I'm just used. I'm a life support system for my vagina, which is for men. It's not for me. I don't masturbate. I don't touch myself. I grew up in a home that didn't allow that. I felt guilty about touching myself. I felt that it was icky. I felt disgusted by it, etc. So all of that, imagine. And then through that, eventually you say, why am I like, everybody's having fun. Why am I not having fun? So you get to that point where it's not like, okay, I'm doing this. I don't want to do this, but I'm doing it. And now you get to this point where I'm going to just do something and have fun. Or maybe you get some therapy, and if a good therapist says, well, do you touch yourself? Why don't you touch yourself? Try to do that, right? And then you start to learn about your body and you start to heal from all of that. But at the same time, once you've had that really good experience, your brain tags it and says, oh, that's what this is about. Aha. Okay. So now you're going to go after that and you're going to, build the habits and everything that allows you now to have pleasure. So I don't think you're doomed. I don't think anyone is doomed. I think as long as they keep to the old script, of course they're doomed. But I think people break out of that. I know psychiatrists who talk about people with, borderline personality disorder. But it's interesting, by the time they're in their 40s, they seem just to grow out of it. It's like there's no the manipulation, the cutting, all that stuff it just goes. Why? What happens as you age that makes your frontal lobe finally kick in and say, enough of that old script. I want pleasure. I want to feel that for me, not for anybody else, but for me. So you start to live for yourself. If that's a new sexual script, then you've opened up the doors to all possibilities.
You brought up an interesting point about masturbation. I think a lot of people worry, right, about masturbation or viewing pornography to masturbation and how that affects your experience of pleasure with another partner. Particularly because a lot of young people are learning how
Yeah,
to pleasure through themselves. So, have
right.
you found any evidence of that?
Obviously not in rats, but in humans, for sure. There is evidence that people are weird, right? I mean, rats, I don't think would ever do this. They don't get stuck in a habit. They just naturally do something different. Whereas we tend to get stuck in habits. And it seems to be part of the great, weird part of human existence that we like things that are predictable, but things that are predictable bore us. So eventually predictability is boring, and doing it, every Friday night at 11:30 when the evening news signs off becomes boring, right? And people know this because they have fantasies. They have fantasies about what they like to do, what they wish they could do if only they were with the right person or in the right, circumstance for it to be done. You saw this with Masters and Johnson, yeah, when they did their original sensate focused therapy in groups. So, they have 2 weeks. These people can't touch each other for a week and a half of that 2 weeks, and they're listening to other people's fantasies. And everybody's getting completely crazy about the, they're, it's like, oh my God, I really want to do this. But no, you can't. Now you've got to then discover the erogenous parts of your partner and discover them in yourself. And by the second Friday, it was, release the hounds. Okay. And people would always say, oh my God, I felt like I was 16 again. It was so good. It was so amazing. Now they're doing the same thing with their partners, but they've gotten turned on by their partner's fantasies and turned on maybe by expressing their own. Yeah. And what I think is really interesting is that that's exactly what it's probably always been this way, but this is what porn gives you. It's a venue for arousal, and it's a fantasy venue for arousal, right? Either by being explicit or by doing something that has some kind of fantasy storyline to it, right? So, you go on Pornhub and it's like, it's all fantasies. The fantasies of the older woman, the older man, the whatever, the brother, sister, et cetera, et cetera. It's all this fantasy laden stuff, right? And people find the fantasies that they can express more arousing, but they find the ones that they don't express even more arousing because they're more naughty, right? So yes, I like looking at, I live in the, I don't know, in Mississippi, and I like looking at interracial porn. Now, why do I like looking at interracial porn? Because it's way more naughty to do that in a place that has, surviving race laws, even if they're not enshrined in the legal system. You're just not supposed to. Don't bring a person that isn't your color home. Well, if you do, now what happens? Right now, exotic has become erotic, and it's this massive activation of excitement. If you can't express that with your partner, only because you think you can't, then you go off and kind of surreptitiously do it while you're masturbating. And that becomes more interesting because you're now expressing the fantasy than it is having that sex every Friday night at 11:30 with the lights out after the news, and then you roll over and fall asleep, right? It's almost like a duty, a marital duty, as opposed to this fantasy that you both could share. I find it really interesting that people don't share porn with each other. Like couples, it's just like, what do you like? What turns you on? Oh, there's a good question, right? And your partner says, well, I like looking at this. You're like, wow. But the partner's not going to tell you because they might feel they're being judged. You're not going to say it because you might feel that you're going to be judged. And we've got this big negative cloud over that. I think the cloud needs to clear. The sun needs to come out, and people need to start talking to each other about it because it reflects their fantasies. I think that's all it is. Unfortunately, you got people that are, my son's age, for example, who look at porn and they'll say, oh, so choking is okay. It's like, Okay, no, you have no idea what you're doing. You want to get into kink, great, but you have no idea what you're doing. You need a trainer. You need somebody who shows you that, right? And, he didn't know that he could go to the BDSM community, for example, and find somebody who could say, well, this is exactly how you do it without actually killing the person or hurting the person, right? And so you could play this game, right? If that's what you're into. I think that's really interesting that it's there, but people don't take advantage of it because they sort of steal it away. It's like, oh, well,
Or
this is
part of it is they
okay.
feel it's naughty, right?
Exactly.
They have this moral incongruence. Like, how could I would never do this in real life. I would only watch it
Right.
in silence.
I mean, I think it's really interesting. And, you talk to people in the kink community, BDSM community, they feel that they're in the lifestyle. Okay. They've made the transition from just thinking about it to learning now how to do it and how to do it in a way that enhances their sex lives. I mean, I think that's really interesting. People can do that with vanilla. They can do that with, any flavor of ice cream. You could talk about it while you're having sex. You could play role play. There's like a million things that can be done. And that, I think more and more therapists are realizing that, okay, you've got a desire disorder. We're going to treat that desire disorder, but now what? Okay, we've taught you how to swim so you don't drown, but how do we teach you maybe how to be an Olympic swimmer? Without imposing our own morality on you. But how can you now learn how to swim to bodybuild or swim to, to achieve an end of greater closeness with your partner?
It's challenging. I mean, I think that there's so much moral incongruence with pornography. Rather than looking at it as a tool that could be used potentially in a positive way, a lot of people end up having so much shame and guilt around it that one, they feel like they're a bad person, or two, they just don't find that enjoyment in their own personal experiences, and then they develop all these issues like, oh, my sex life isn't great, or they don't connect with their partner like they should.
That's exactly true. And I think getting people to open up is really important. We saw this like in some of the pharmaceutical trials for drugs like bremelanotide or flibanserin, about a 30% placebo rate of people getting better just on the placebo. And part of that was really people having the opportunity just to talk about their sex lives, to kind of get it out in the open. All this pent up, oh, I don't like it. I don't like it when he touches me this way and he always touches me that way. And so just getting it out sometimes it lifts a huge weight off of people, and they can actually then express themselves sexually. I find that really interesting that we are pent up about it. It's like, oh, I can't do this and I can't do that. And then it's like, I do it and it's like, is it okay? Did I break anything? Are we still in a relationship? Do you still love me? And it's like, oh, yes, I do, even more. Now I want you even more. Right. And so it really has a positive effect, I think, if people use it as a tool and not necessarily as an end in itself.
You mentioned earlier when we were talking about having sex is that there develops a synchrony. Tell me, like, what exactly is going on physiologically? Like, are there actual changes that you're seeing, the way our brains light up or things like that? Are there things that are actually physiologically happening during this time that really help people sort of connect in a different level?
I think there are, unfortunately, it hasn't been studied so much in a sexual circumstance it's been studied a bit in a romantic circumstance and a whole lot in mother-child interactions. You can see synchrony of brain waves, for example, if people are wearing an EEG apparatus. You can see synchrony of certain temporal lobe waves. If you surprise both of them, then they both show this delayed parietal wave of 300 milliseconds called the P300 wave. And they both start to show that to all new things. So they're both looking at a video screen, for example, and something happens. Now, when they're not romantically inclined, one might have a delayed P300, the other has a perfectly normal P300. But the ones that are really romantically inclined, they tend to have these synchronous moments together, right? And of course, where it's been studied a lot is in mother-child interactions. So, maintaining eye contact, for example, and showing that. Now, that requires you to be aware of the other person's face. And But what are you looking at, really? Are you looking at the chin? Are you looking at the mouth move? Are you looking at the ears? Are you looking at the eyes? We tend to look much more at the eyes, right, when we're talking. Maybe at the eyes and the mouth. I mean, those are two things that people really spend a lot of time looking at. And not the nose, not the earlobe, it's not the forehead, because that just gets weird. But you're looking directly at the person. And when people do that, you again see synchronous wave patterns that happen when they're talking about things that are mutually, like, they both like, for example. So, tell me about something that you both did that you both found enjoyable. Well, we did this hike and we did this and we did that. And things are spiking in both of them at the same time. And that's synchrony at one level. Probably what's happening, the systems that underlie that, thalamic, the output from the thalamus, right, that kind of takes all your sensory input and merges it up to places that it needs to go. That thalamic output is really important for the generation of these kind of external cortical brainwaves. So you're feeling it again. When you're recounting it, you're feeling it. We've all done this. It's a nice feeling. You're telling a story about something that happened to you, and you're really into it because you're feeling it. Yeah. And you feel it again. And the person that you did this with feels it too as you're telling the story. I think we need to do a lot more work on that, a lot more work on finding out what synchrony is and how it gets lost, right, in couples that are beginning to drift apart, because that does happen. You can almost see this in the way they walk together. So couples in sync tend to walk either like this together or like this together. Yeah. And when they start like completely mismanaging that, yeah, it's really hard to keep your arm around a person or your hand in hand around a person, because the lockstep is off, right? So they stop touching each other and they start really physically drifting apart. I think it would be very interesting and telling if you brought those people in, right? They'd have to self-identify, which would probably be a really hard thing to do and would be a problem with the data.
Hey, honey, we got to go sign up for this. I don't feel like we're in sync anymore.
Yeah, exactly, right. And then see if they show the same synchrony to these like events, right? And if they don't, that tells you then that what their bodies are doing is a reflection of what their brains are doing, which is always the case. But this would show that in a way. And then if you could get them to be in sync again, it's sort of like the old idea. Well, I feel depressed, so if I feel depressed, I'm gonna hold my face to show the emotion that I'm experiencing. But what happens when I force myself to smile and I'm not feeling good, right? And in some cultures, people do that anyway. But does that contribute to less depression? Because your body is doing something and your brain is saying, oh, well, I'm smiling, therefore I'm probably not as depressed as I think I am. I mean, your brain is really good at detecting heart rate. Your brain is so sensitive to heart rate. And when heart rate goes up, your brain is like, okay, what's going on here? Why is this happening? Yeah. So it's going to look for a cause and try to find it. And if it doesn't find it, then you feel a little bit weirder with yourself. But it's very interesting. Like with PTSD, you find that patients that have this need to go through cognitive behavior therapy to get their heart rate down and not go up when they're, shown something that produces the PTSD experience or reminds them of some horrible trauma that they were in. And I remember a study that was done in Montreal at the Douglas Research Hospital at McGill, where they gave PTSD patients propranolol, a beta blocker, okay, a beta adrenergic blocker. So the heart rate isn't going to go up at all because it can't. And then they kind of flood them, right? These were all ex-soldiers. They flood them with a war movie or whatever, and their heart rate didn't go up. And they come back and they say, I feel totally different. And they show them the flooded movie again after giving them a saline injection, and they don't have a PTSD reaction. As if you've given them 3 months of cognitive behavior therapy. Yeah, only you've given them a single injection of propranolol. So the brain is saying, "Oh, I'm fixed. I'm good. I can experience this now without the reaction that makes me feel completely stressed out." Right? So if that happens, imagine that a similar kind of thing happens when you have First experiences with pleasure, first experiences with trauma, first experiences with your brain just tags it. As you grow apart, your brain tags it. So as you come back together, your brain may tag that too and say, we're experiencing this synchrony again. Oh, we're in love again. I don't feel like cheating on her anymore. I want to do this. I want to do it with her. I want to be with her because we're feeling that synchrony again.
Are you sick of going to the doctor only to have them talk at you for 15 minutes and leave without knowing exactly why they're prescribing you this certain medication and what exactly the next step is to take to optimize your health? Wouldn't it be great to finally find a doctor who actually listens to you, answers your questions, and doesn't rush you out the door? Well, at my practice, Rena Malik, MD, I aim to do just that. I specialize in taking care of patients who have issues with their sex lives, issues with their bladder, with their hormone health, or are having pain in their pelvic region or with sex. My goal is to give you the time and attention you deserve so you can leave with a clear understanding of your condition as well as our treatment plan that's optimized for your goals. During your visit, I'm 100% present with you for an entire hour. And after you leave, you can reach me. It is super easy to send me a message through our secure portal, and I'll get back to you within 24 to 48 hours. No questions asked, no hidden fees. Scheduling is easy. Just visit our website, renamalikmd.com/appointments. We see patients in both Irvine and Beverly Hills, California, and I see patients virtually in California, Florida, Illinois, Maryland, New York, New Jersey, and Virginia. Oh, and don't forget Texas. If you're outside these states, consider seeing me for an educational visit. I look forward to seeing you. You know, you brought up an interesting thing about metoprolol. So arousal, right? When you're aroused, your heart rate goes up. And that can be arousal sexually, arousal on a bridge, arousal when you're whatever, scared. And we know that metoprolol has effects on erectile function for some. But I wonder if when you're on metoprolol, you're having maybe decreased arousal not just for erectile function, but just in general, like less arousal in the brain. Yeah.
That's exactly right. I would never suggest using this. Maybe for someone who has, who feels that they're, I don't know, having a problem with compulsive sexual behavior disorder or something of that nature. But I don't know that I would ever suggest, if somebody who's on this needs to know, right, before they go on it, like to treat a cardiovascular problem, they really need to know, okay, well, this could very well have an effect on everything that arouses you. So while you're on it, just know that this could happen. If it does, they're not going to go, oh my God, I have erectile dysfunction, because they do, but it's drug induced. It's not, it's not them. It's not inherent in them, right? That's happening.
Probably the same with women too, right?
Oh, absolutely. The control of clitoral erection is exactly the same in women and men. Yeah. I mean, it's the same organ, right? It's the same organ. So, ours is just a big distended clitoris.
So we talked a little bit about motivation and desire. Let's then talk about what happens in the brain once you are, you've started having intercourse, going into orgasm, and then after the orgasm.
Well, I would imagine that if it's anything like what our rats tell us, your dopamine levels go up, they start phasic, they go tonic, right? So you're just secreting dopamine all the time, okay? And that's as you're moving toward orgasm. Noradrenaline is up. It has to be, because you're aroused, and this is the arousal system. Now, serotonin is exerting a bit of at the spinal level, is exerting a bit of an effect that activates the parasympathetic system, so it keeps blood in the genitals rather than activating the sympathetic system. So your spinal cord has these what are called lateral spinothalamic neurons that are actually the orgasm generators, right? The sexual orgasm generators. And, they're essentially kind of a gate that's gating the parasympathetic. And as soon as the sympathetic outflow overruns that, they turn on. That allows for what's called fast ramping sympathetic flow. That fast ramping is when you reach the point of no return, where the orgasm is imminent. Even if a bear comes through the tent, you're still going to have an orgasm, right? So it's just an imminent reflexive action that's happening at that point, or what I would call a climax, right? With the orgasm being something that your brain experiences sort of in episodic memory, in a real experience that you can have, that you know consciously that you're having. When that happens, of course, both opioids and serotonin get released in the brain, especially in the frontal lobe, but also in the limbic system, like en masse. Okay, there's a massive release of beta endorphin in the brain. There's a massive release of other opioids as well, and serotonin in the frontal lobe. And what that does is, the first thing it does is it shuts dopamine down. And multiply orgasmic women, it can shut it down for a very small period, but it still shuts it down, right? If there was any more stimulation, you're like, okay, stop. That's like, just like, give me 10 seconds to recover and we can go again. In men, you're going to have a refractory period that lasts a bit longer. Or maybe a whole lot longer, but that's one thing we don't understand at all, is the refractory period in humans. Like, some people understand it in rats better, some work of colleagues in Mexico, for example, but it's like, we just don't understand a thing about human refractoriness. But if the rat data are telling us something about humans, the opioids are suppressing dopamine, serotonin is whoppingly suppressing dopamine. And while that suppression is on, your interest is minimized. It's not completely gone, but it's definitely minimized until it recovers. And once it recovers, you're back. That recovery is a real interesting phenomenon because, again, we just don't know why. In some instances, it recovers faster. In other instances, it recovers slower. The pattern of orgasm seems to be the same in every person within each individual. You look at that in terms of the pelvic floor and the activation of the pelvic floor. So, some women have higher pelvic floor tension. Some have like almost no pelvic floor tension. And when they have an orgasm, it's almost like they have a volcanic eruption of the pelvic floor. The ones that have high tension tend to have an eruption that looks a bit like an avalanche, right? So it boom, 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 and then pelvic floor tension goes down. Others have waves of it, with the waves coming every 10 seconds or even every minute. Just depends on how that works. And they last anywhere between 8 and 20 seconds, right, in terms of the pelvic floor. But what's also happening is, because the dopamine has gone down, you get this massive release of prolactin. Mm-hmm. Now, it's not going to make you lactate because it's not lasting very long, because the dopamine is going to come back when that serotonergic inhibition goes off. But that release of prolactin is another objective measure of orgasm, right? I mean, again, unless you're lactating or you have a pituitary adenoma that's secreting prolactin, or you've got, I don't know, like some horrible stress that is chronic and, long lasting and unavoidable. And, and now you begin to get a little prolactin release. You don't see that unless you're having an orgasm. Without doing an invasive thing, we can use some of these markers of orgasm to say, okay, did it really happen? Did you have a climax or did you have an orgasm? The orgasm is kind of added on top of the climax, that reflexive action, the movement from parasympathetic to sympathetic. I mean, it's an interesting thing that's happening in the brain. And of course, when dopamine goes down, your interest goes down, your motivation is less, right? Now, it doesn't mean you don't have motivation to go again. And that can depend on, a whole host of factors, one of which is the degree of sympathetic arousal that you're experiencing. So in new relationships, people might say, oh, well, God, I could ejaculate 3 times with this new relationship and blah, blah, blah. And then once we moved in together, well, now we're having sex once a week. What happened there? Well, I mean, again, habit can bring that sympathetic arousal down. Then you go and have vacation sex and suddenly you're, now doing it twice instead of 3 times. It just depends on that flip of that switch, both at the spinal level, but also in your brain, that's saying, oh my God, I'm really excited, right? As opposed to, same old, yeah, it's Friday, time for our duty. I think that people toggle between that. And then they do something where, again, we discussed porn, maybe they go and cheat on their partner with somebody else. And when they do that, well, now what? Now their sympathetic arousal is back. And they're like, oh, I felt young again with the new one. But they don't understand that, okay, get rid of the old one, go with the new one, same thing is going to happen. You're going to basically just go through this serial quote unquote serial monogamy, right? Where you're monogamous until it's no longer arousing. Then you go pick somebody else, without knowing that you could have all this arousal with your same partner. Because what the brain is doing is the same thing every time. It's just the level of arousal is going to change the context.
It was Ian Kerner. We were just talking about how people refuse to work at sex. Like they just don't want to. They literally refuse to like have any sort of like, oh no, sex should be natural. It should be easy. The arousal should always be there. But like we're not cavemen and women anymore. Like there's stressors in life. There's a whole bunch of other things going on. We have these devices that maintain our interest. We have crazy pornography that's always accessible. And so like yeah, it's you have to work at being with your partner and working on it if you want that arousal to stay high.
That's absolutely right. People get a sense that working on it means that they're carrying like a big sack of bricks behind them. Oh, I have to work at this to get the, but as opposed to play. Remember being a kid, and when you played, what did you do? You did a little bit of this, then a little bit of that, then a little bit of something else. Then you spent a long time drawing with crayons and you made a picture. Oh, now you're done with the picture. Now it's on to something else. And you can do this with a partner sexually. You can do anything. It's like I hear, clinicians sometimes say, oh, I had this one guy, and I was trying to get them just to not do the same thing every time. So I suggested that they have sex in the kitchen. And they looked at me like, this is rocket science. Like, how do you do that? Sex in the kitchen? How would you? And she was like, well, get a chair. I don't know. Burn the pot roast. Go for crepes. Like, I don't know. There's a way to do that. There's a way to have sex on a couch. There's a way to have sex in the basement. There's a way to do it in different rooms, like not relegated only to a bed. Well, but the bed is comfortable. The couch is comfortable. A table can be comfortable. I think it can be anything. Sherhite has a great quote that, sex can be a hot dog and a Coke or a 5-course French meal, right? But the idea is not to do only one thing. Don't only live on a hot dog and a Coke, and don't only live on 5-course French meals, but steal a quickie. You're home for lunch, steal a quickie and go back to work, right? I mean, there's a million things to do that people can do. I think what happens is when they move in with each other, now it's like, oh, well, now sex is going to be easy because we can do it whenever we want because we live together. I don't have to go over to your place. You don't have to come over to my place. And then we have to arrange what's going to happen the next morning. When do you leave? Now we live together. So now it's easy. I think easy, of course, makes it less arousing just because it's easy, right? And it's always available. What people forget to do is date each other, right? They forget what it was like to plan for it, to anticipate it, to want it, to not have it whenever you want it, but have it on a date night. And don't go back home. Send the kids off to your grandparents. It's like rent a hotel room. Have sex in the hotel room. Now you're doing something interesting, maybe naughty, maybe however you experience it, but it's something different. And choose a different hotel every time. Like, don't go to the same hotel. Oh, let's go to room 457 because that's the room we always have. No, go to a different hotel.
There's these websites now where you can like rent for a few hours, and it's not like the Motel 6s, like you can actually rent a nice hotel for like 4 hours. And absolutely, dating doesn't mean dinner and a movie. It can mean whatever you want it to mean. And I think that's so important.
Absolutely. Like, just don't do the same thing over and over and over again. But again, that's the great human paradox. We want to be able to predict things. Habit allows you to predict things, but habit is boring. And so we move always, with like a sine wave through wanting things to be predictable to wanting things to be unpredictable, because it's way more arousing when they're unpredictable than when they're predictable.
I wanted to touch on, you mentioned orgasm obviously leads to this rise of prolactin. It's a little bit more difficult to reactivate, your arousal after that. There's a movement, right, of people who sort of believe that semen retention allows you to sort of maintain that arousal and you can orgasm without ejaculation, which we know is true. You can orgasm without ejaculation. But I want to know, is there a physiologic basis from an expert, obviously, is there a physiologic basis for that?
Not for semen retention. All that, what that's really doing They call it semen retention, building up my testosterone. Your testosterone levels are actually going to go down over not having sex. Whereas having a lot of sex, your testosterone, you don't lose your testosterone when you ejaculate. Your semen doesn't contain this huge amount of reservoir of your body's testosterone that you're now like leaching into this other partner. That doesn't happen at all. In fact, it's just the opposite. But what semen retention, what the act of that does, is it makes you wait, which makes you want it more. So when you finally have it, it feels better. Being put off, being teased, being, edged, not in the orgasmic way, but edged in the sort of more anticipatory way. It's like, oh, I know you'd like it now, but I don't think so. I don't know. Maybe tomorrow. Maybe if you're good, maybe tomorrow. So there's like a little bit of that game playing that can happen between people. And of course, when tomorrow comes, even though you had sex 48 hours ago, tomorrow you are ready to go because it's supposed to be today. Yeah. And so I think what happens with this idea of semen retention is that they're just delaying it. And delayed gratification, there's a curve, an inverted U-shaped curve to that. But, as long as you're delaying it up to optimality, yeah, then it's going to feel good. If you delay it any further, it's going to feel not so good, right? In the sense that you've now delayed it, you don't even care about it anymore, right? And that can happen too. And that does happen, unfortunately, with some individuals who believe in this so much that they then sublimate it to go with their daily workout routine. So their workout routine kind of becomes a sublimated sexuality, if you will, because now it's like I'm working out. And they get into that almost as a compulsive behavior, right? Which I think some of that really is, unfortunately. Again, it's a different habit that now inhibits what you're really trying to do with it, right? Which is kind of not what you would think is going to happen. So I don't think semen retention does that. Well, we know this from hypnosis. Okay, you can hypnotize people to have orgasms. And when they do, men don't ejaculate, but they have kind of a motor memory of orgasm in their brain. Their brain knows what an orgasm is. And despite not ejaculating and not even necessarily having, the little creep out of fluid, but they have an orgasm and their prolactin goes up. Okay. So, and that happens in women as well. And there's not really good evidence that they even get vaginally lubricated under hypnosis. You can make them get vaginally lubricated if you say, oh, and you're going to feel this vaginal lubrication and blah, 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 because you're activating motor memory, kind of like riding a bike, right? If you've never had an orgasm, when you hypnotize people to have an orgasm, they can't because they don't know what it is. Their brain has no idea what it is. If you've never ridden a bike and I try to hypnotize you to make believe you're riding a bike, you don't have the sensations of it, Whereas if you have ridden a bike, then you do have the sensations because you're activating essentially the motor cortex. You're activating the memory of that, right? So that you can experience the memory of doing it, which, is a whole body experience. And orgasm is that way too. What's interesting is that prolactin goes up, and it goes up as if you were masturbating, right? It's that the levels of masturbation, prolactin are always lower than partnered sex, but it goes up to masturbation-like levels. So I find that interesting in the sense that, yes, the orgasm is real, but it's a motor memory of it that doesn't involve necessarily the climax and the seminal emission and the activation of general lubrication, unless that's part of it.
And I think you brought up an interesting point before you started talking about hypnosis, was that if you go too long with semen retention, you then sort of don't want it anymore. And do you think in cases where there's like compulsive behavior around sex, those are the people who really feel that like mental clarity that, oh, I'm finally not thinking about it. Is that the people who tend to benefit the most, you would guess?
Yeah, I think they benefit from it. But one of the problems with the semen retention thing, it's almost like the problems of a 12-step program where you're always thinking about it, but not doing it. And so relapse is really high. 12-step programs for alcoholism, for example, relapse is way high. Taking heroin, it's even higher because you're always thinking about it. Like, don't do it. You want to do it, but you're not going to do it. And if you think you're going to do it, call somebody who's going to come on over and help you not do it. And people who are into semen retention and into like the no fat movement, for example, they've got like hundreds of people that they can call and say, I need an intervention. I feel like I'm going to touch myself. It's almost like watching, I don't know, Dr. Strangelove when he's trying not to do a Nazi salute and he's grabbing his arm and forcing his arm not to do it. They're like forcing their hands not to touch their penis. Don't touch my penis as I need porn. And if I look at porn, then I have to touch my penis and somebody come over and stop me from doing this. And yeah, I think because they're always thinking about it, then you always have this greater propensity for relapse. And I don't want to talk about it like it's an addiction because I don't really believe that you can become addicted to your own neurotransmitters. But I think that with them, it's so compulsive and their impulse control is so low, and again, even that wafts and wanes, right? So when it's wafting, it's much more difficult for them to gain control. Yeah. And then when they have this mental clarity, it's like, okay, I know that I'm not going to touch myself, but they always sublimate it into something else.
So they transfer it to something else. Yeah.
Does that help? Maybe, but maybe getting them to have a more realistic view of their own sexual needs, right? And not to kind of be married to this notion that, oh my God, every time I ejaculate, like I'm losing all my testosterone. It's like, no, you're not, and maybe understanding that is important to get them not to be in this, oh my God, I can't. Oh my God, I have to stop myself. Oh my God, I have to think about it. Oh my God, don't think about it. No, don't think about it. No, don't go. Oh my God, porn. I got it. Yeah. And then they're lost and then they got to start over, Whereas if they had a better idea of their sexuality, it would be, something they wouldn't have to be like, getting the monkey off their back.
Yeah. So you mentioned one of I think the big myths is that like when you masturbate or watch pornography, let's say, because that's actually what people say is when you watch pornography, your brain's response is so different from that of when you orgasm with a partner. So let's talk about the science behind that. What happens in the brain?
Well, it's exactly the same as when you're with your partner, but not at orgasm yet. But the orgasm is going to be exactly the same too, especially when you feel guilty and when you feel like you shouldn't do it and you're trying very hard not to do it. That creates an even greater dopamine response, right? It's something that a guy in Germany called Wolfram Schultz studied, that when you predict that a reward is going to come and it doesn't come, so he calls that reward prediction error. When that happens in your brain, your dopamine is like, okay, wait a minute. Whoa, hold on, time out. What the hell's going on here? I thought it was going to come and now it doesn't come. So rats, if they're bar pressing for a reward and it doesn't, you're looking at their dopamine in their like nucleus accumbens or the mesolimbic system. Yeah, dope goes up, it stays up, The reward doesn't come. And now it goes up even further. And it activates the motor system to try to figure out, well, what the hell? Like I bar pressed 10 times. I'm supposed to get a pellet. I didn't get a food pellet. What the hell? So they bar press even more. We see this in human behavior, right? You press the button to get the candy bar out of the machine. The candy bar doesn't come. So what's the first thing we do? We press the button like 50 more times to try to get the candy bar out. A perfectly natural response, right? And it's a bar pressing response, just like rats do. Sexually, it's a similar kind of thing. Don't do it. So you're thinking about it. If we look at, for example, their ventral striatum, right, which, Voon did in a paper, with fMRI, well, the ones that say, oh, well, I've got, compulsive sexual behavior disorder, or I've got porn addiction or whatever, they come with that area already because they know they're going to see porn. They come with that area now already massively activated. Whereas people that don't identify as sex addicts, for example, don't have that, right? Because, well, it's no big deal. I'm going to see porn, big deal, right? I always see porn. Doesn't mean anything to me except I masturbate, so it's no big deal. But these guys come with, oh my God, I'm going to see porn. Oh, and now the dopamine response is much greater because they have this, reward prediction error that's happening. And guilt is a great driver of that. I shouldn't do this. Oh, now it's much greater, right? Because you want to do it. And if you shouldn't do it, then you're not going to do it. But you're going to think about it more. And that's beautiful reward prediction error.
So just builds a cycle.
Yeah. And that's why we think the brain is different, but it's not. And when they ejaculate, when they have an orgasm, if I could be taking their blood, I'm sure I would see that their prolactin goes up. And it would probably go up just like it does with everybody else who masturbates or has partnered sex. So and if I could, put a probe in their rectum, I could see their pelvic floor activation. I'm sure you get this massive pelvic floor activation is like an earthquake. So you would see this earthquake. You'd see the prolactin go up. I would venture to guess it probably wouldn't go up any differently than it would in somebody who was kind of a yoked control to them. Okay, I haven't had sex in like three weeks. Okay, so you're now yoked to the no fap guy who's going to come in, and now we're going to do this study. And yeah, I bet you there's going to be no difference, right? And again, you also see this in people who don't identify that way. And they look at porn, more than twice a week. They masturbate, they do everything. But for them, it's no big deal. And we bring them into a lab, they have no problem getting an erection. They have no problem. Whereas other guys are worried about it, right? Yeah. They think they have porn-induced erectile dysfunction. No, what they are is in a very long refractory period because they cranked off 3 ejaculations yesterday, and today they can't get an erection because they're still refractory, so lay off it for 48 hours and it's going to come right back.
You think that their refractory period, do you think there's a difference? Because the thing about refractory periods, at least biology wise, some people have really short ones, especially when they're younger. As they age, it gets longer. So do you think that those people who are having, let's say, like 3 ejaculations in one day from pornography are different? Or because you would suspect that after, you're right, probably 48 hours, it should all be good to go. But are they masturbating so often that their refractory period is always on?
I think for the ones that say they have quote unquote porn-induced erectile dysfunction, yeah, it's like it's on until they start, looking at the dark web and finding porn that they've never seen before of things that they know are naughty and maybe even illegal, right? And so they find that and they're, oh my God, now I'm aroused. I've never seen a woman have sex with a dog, and oh my God, look at that. Holy toot. And suddenly they have an erection again. Because if you think of the war between dopamine and serotonin, because they're always mutually inhibiting each other. Yeah. So when dopamine's high, serotonin is low. Especially in the frontal lobe, when serotonin is high, dopamine is low. And it cycles naturally, right? So if dopamine is low and serotonin is high, but I see something that's now going to raise this above that level, well, now I'm here. And now I can get my erection again, right? And if I keep on masturbating to that particular set of images, well, now habit's going to make this happen. And you're going to be like, oh my God, I am an addict because now I need to get, more stimulated in order to achieve that. And again, just if you don't do it when you want to do it or when you think you should do it because you did, 3 yesterday, so you should do 3 again today. It kind of reminds you of people that do 60K runs every day. If they don't do 60K, if they only do 59K, they're going to get fat. So this obsessive compulsive kind of thing, which is driving that behavior, is now driving this particular behavior because it works, but it only works for a short period of time, which is another thing about individuals like this. The comorbidity with anxiety and depression is huge. And I think what's happening for some of these people, if not most of them, is that they're using sex as almost like a way of self-medicating against their depression. So it's like, they ride this roller coaster. They're down, down, down. Woo! But now they have this, but they're still down, right? And then they have another woo! But they come up and now they're down again. Right? It's a momentary relief of the depression.
Quick break from this episode to let you know I am so grateful that you're spending part of your day with me. I started creating content online to empower people to learn more about their bodies without needing to go see a doctor, pay a copay, wait in a waiting room, or find parking. And it has been one of the most rewarding experiences of my life. If you want to help support our mission of providing free education, please consider joining our premium membership. There you will have access to ad-free episodes, which are released early, as well as free transcripts and the opportunity to ask me anything. And these questions are answered in our monthly AMA episodes. Support the show and join today at renamalik.supercast.com. Can't wait to see you there. I just talked to Dr. Prousey recently, maybe like a few months ago, and she was saying she had done some preliminary research, it's not published yet, that looked at people who were defined as having compulsive sexual disorder, and there was such a huge commingling of depression that maybe we're actually, if we treat the depression, we'll actually treat the compulsion.
Interestingly, putting them on antidepressants, especially SSRIs, helps to do that. And it helps to do it because now you're amping the serotonin. So the dopamine is now, and you're kind of, instead of the dopamine always going way up, right? Now it's now back in this normal little cycle, right? And you can start then to treat the whole set of behaviors. I mean, some people use sex, some people use eating as their way of treating their depression. Some people use skydiving and other and some people just get obsessive about what they do. Oh, my room is all tidy now. I got to tidy my room every day because, I'm putting my life back together. But no, you're not. You're putting your room back together, but your life is still a shambles, and you're not dealing with that because you're dealing with this other compulsive behavior, right? And so it's, and neurochemically, you're kind of realigning the system, which is what they need.
So is it a compulsion or is it an addiction? Because one could argue that if you need more novelty or more intensity to get the same result, that's sort of a facet of addiction. But is it that, or is it a compulsion?
Well, it's also a facet of compulsivity, right? Because you're always doing something to make sure that it works, and usually it never works. So you got to do it better the next time. And when that doesn't work, you do it better the next time. You do it better the next time. And people have seen this like in serial killers who are showing compulsivity, where if they screw up this time, then they're not going to screw up next time. But they do, because it's kind of built in. That's the inherent nature of compulsivity. I think one of the reasons why it's not, two things happen that make it not an addiction. Two very important things. One is that there's no withdrawal effect. And there's habituation, but not tolerance, because tolerance and withdrawal build up together. So for example, if you're a heroin addict, heroin being diacetylmorphine makes it a beautiful analgesic. I mean, you need less heroin to have an analgesic effect. What you see happen in withdrawal, in addition to, the hallucinations and everything that happens with them, you also see that they become hyperalgesic. So things that, touch that would be normal, like, oh, don't, here's a little love tap, don't do that. It's like, ow, what have you done to me? Ow, you broke my hand. Ow, it feels like my hand is broken. Okay, no, your hand is fine. But you now are showing the supersensitivity to the opposite effect of the drug, because your brain and neurons do this just on a neuron by neuron basis. If you tweak them a certain way, they reestablish homeostasis under the tweakage. So if my drug is constantly depressing the pain system, the reestablishment of homeostasis, which is tolerance, means that now I'm going to show a normal response under the influence of the drug. Pull the drug away, boom. Now I've got a much hyper response, which shows you how the cell itself was reestablishing its homeostasis, right? If you can't hear something, you turn up the volume, right? But now the volume's up, and you turn on the radio or the TV in the morning, and the volume is really up, and you're just like, oh my God, like what? Ow, that hurts my ears, right? But last night it didn't hurt at all. It was perfect for the movie you were watching. Tolerance and withdrawal co-occur. Now, what could we say about being in a refractory period? Like, let's say they're in a refractory period, but they're going to call that the addiction. Okay, they want it, they crave it, they need it, they need to have it, but now their penis doesn't work. Okay, so I'm going to go off porn. What should happen if tolerance and withdrawal had built up is they should be walking around with an erection, like almost priapistic erection, the next day and the day after and the day after, until that kind of weans down. But that's not what happens, because habituation is built up, not tolerance. Addiction just takes it one step further, because you're actually putting a foreign substance in there that is now doing what your neurotransmitters can't do. Whereas porn activates your neurotransmitters, but it doesn't activate a foreign substance, right? That's is now antagonizing a receptor for a really long period of time, so that the neurotransmitters can't get on at all. So the cell has to say, oh, I'm not hearing the neurotransmitter. I'll make more receptors for it, right? So now I can turn up the volume. Yeah. So your brain doesn't do that to natural stimuli, but it does it to to a drug because it's kind of taking over the system, like pharmacologically taking over the system and doing something to that system physically that your own neurotransmitters can't do. But your own neurotransmitters can do a lot like it, right? And it's not to say that they don't have a problem. I think they do, and that problem really needs to be taken care of one way or another. But it's just too easy to say, oh well, I've got porn addiction, so therefore, I don't have to take responsibility for my actions because I'm an addict, right? It's too easy. It's too easy to do that and then rely on that as your reason for why you cheat or your reason for why God, we saw this with Tiger Woods. Yeah, I mean, Tiger was having sex all the time, right? And as long as his wife didn't know about it, things were in balance. But once she did, she attacked him with the golf clubs, and then everything went down. His golf game was destroyed because it was riding on his arousal, right? So his golf game and his sexual behavior were kind of co-occurring with each other. And once the sex went down, the golf plummeted as well, which I think is really interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. Because he needed that. His brain had sort of habituated to that level of arousal.
Yeah, and I mean, you saw him play. I mean, I don't play golf, but I was never excited by golf until I watched him just go and just do it like, a Zen master, with his eyes closed, just like, oh, making shots that were like incredible. And you'd see this, and it was just like, oh my God, like, what is sustaining that? And well, now we know.
That's so interesting. You mentioned hypnosis. What does hypnosis do to the brain that would cause someone to have an orgasm? Like, how does it work?
I mean, obviously, people don't really know how it works, and I think that this hypnotist friend of mine, Albert Nierenberg, who came over to Prague so we could actually do this experiment that I've been wanting to do for like a decade now, but nobody will ever fund. So we just funded it out of pocket, and I got ethical approval for it. We tend to think now that it's not doing anything magical. It's simply activating motor memory. And this is an old psychological phenomenon that people had talked about in terms of habit back in the like 1930s, like 100 years ago. So people talk about how do habits form? Like, how do you get good at something to the point that it's automated, right? So you think about, the first time you drove a car or the first time you got into a car, right, in driver's ed, well, you had like 4 legs and 3 arms and you had no idea what you were doing. The car was stopping and starting. And 2 years later, 3 years later, 4 years later, you're driving down a highway having a discussion and you make the turn off and you're not even thinking about it. So you've achieved this kind of I don't know, this Taoist notion of doing without doing, right? You've actually achieved that. And how? Because you practiced. When you get good at playing a musical instrument, you just play it. You pick it up and you start playing. And you don't have to think about it. You just do it because your brain can do that. And it forms motor habits, which people 100 years ago talked about. People don't talk about it anymore, but I think they will again. But motor habits are what hypnosis gets and brings out of you when the hypnotist puts you into a suggestive activation of your brain where you are now suspending disbelief, you're in trance, and in trance you're able to pull out these motor memories. I mean, they can implant a memory in you, but it's not true. But for some people, it will feel like it really happened, even with evidence to the contrary. So people who, for example, have never had an orgasm, you can't hypnotize them to have an orgasm. An orgasm is a state that your brain learns when you have the first few of them. But it's nothing that's kind of in there pre-programmed. To have it, once you activate that state, yes, now you have it, and now your brain kind of knows what that system is, knows what that state is. Prior to that, it doesn't know that. Again, just like somebody can hypnotize you to taste chocolate, and then, if you're tasting a whole bunch of different things with a blindfold on and say, okay, which one is chocolate? You have just as much predictability as if you'd never been hypnotized to taste chocolate. So they can't hypnotize you to do something you've never done before. Where the trick is by putting you in a context in which it would be normal for you to have that. Okay, so it's normal for you to ride a bike, Okay. You're going to ride a bike home. And so now you're getting on your bike and you're riding your bike and, you're sitting on this stage with this hypnotist and, now your legs are going because you're riding your bike and your arms are out holding the steering wheel, holding the wheel, the handlebars. And you're not really riding a bike, but you have ridden a bike. So your brain knows what that's like. So your body will go into the motion of doing that. That's motor habit. And that's what I think hypnotism is getting at, in addition to the emotion that you experience while you're doing it. Example, I had a friend when I was in grad school who hypnotized people to remember wearing a blue shirt. So he hypnotized them, and under hypnosis, he said, wow, that's a really nice blue shirt that you're wearing today, and blah, blah, blah. But he was filming it in color, and you could clearly see that they weren't wearing a blue shirt. So he brought him in a week later, and he said, what do you remember about that day? And they had to list like 50 things that they remembered. Most people remembered that they wore a blue shirt. So he shows them the video and says, do you see anything incorrect with what you said? And nobody did. And he said, well, were you wearing a blue shirt? You said you were wearing a blue shirt, but you weren't wearing a blue shirt. And I said, oh, well, maybe I didn't wear the blue shirt to the session, but I know I wore a blue shirt that day. I probably went home and changed. They confabulate, as well as having this memory of putting on a blue shirt, right? Which is habit. I think that's all hypnosis is, but because it's motor memory, you can get people to take their clothes off. You can get people to, jump up and down. You can get people to be a kid again, anticipating getting candy. You can get them to do all this stuff, right? Because it's all still in there.
It's fascinating. I wonder, like, for example, I mean, there's so many clinical applications. Like, what if you could do it to people with post-orgasmic illness syndrome and see if
Oh, yeah.
they manifest the symptoms that they have, right? Like, that'd be so interesting.
I pointed this out to him and he didn't kind of see it until he saw it. But he would do this thing where he count down from 5. So they're, he takes them into this field, and then it's a warm day out, and they feel very sensual. And there's a waterfall, and the water is cool, and the water's hitting them, and it's hitting their pelvis, and it's hitting their feeling. They're beginning to get a feeling in their genitals that they're going to have an orgasm, and the water's pounding and thrusting on them. So he's using terminology that's very similar to what might happen, and he's doing it rhythmically. Okay, so that's again part of what people do in trance, I guess. And then he counts down from 5. Okay. And this is like, it's so amazing to watch this. So, 5. And when I say 1, you're going to have a very powerful orgasm. 4, it's getting imminent. 3, it's getting, you're feeling it's close. 2, it's getting really close. 2, it's imminent. 2, you're about to go. It's about to have 2. You're almost there. 2, oh my God, it's almost at the point of no return. 1. Now, interestingly, when he's saying 2, okay, all of these people, their hands are flaying. They're showing, kind of an orgasm face. They're kind of going, oh, they're doing this. Their legs are flaying. Their toes are curling. It's amazing to watch this, right? Why is it so interesting from another clinical standpoint? Is that what if you took somebody who has rapid ejaculation or premature ejaculation and you hold them off at 2?
Right. Yeah.
Right? Hold them off at 2 for like, I don't know, like 5 minutes, hold them off at 2. And then instill the memory that when they feel like the ejaculation is coming, think of the number 2. And so you kind of get this kind of Manchurian candidate thing happening, in this case at their spinal cord, that's now continuing to inhibit, as if you had the stop-start method, right, that Masters and Johnson developed, right, or that that people are doing now with like a small electrical current, right? So there's an Israeli group that has this like little thing that you can attach to your scrotum, and it applies this like, I mean, I felt it attached here. It applies this really small electrical current, but you feel it, you feel it, you feel it, you feel it. It's a distraction. It's a distracting stimulus. Okay. And that's why the squeeze technique works, because you close, boom. And now you've got a distraction. And people try to distract themselves who have this. They try, oh yeah, who won the 1969 World Series? Oh, the New York Mets. It was the New York Mets. So they constantly try to distract themselves. And distraction helps, right? Because it's kind of realigning. Instead of the core being all excited. Now you got this lateral inhibition coming in from the distractor.
I think it depends on the distraction, right? Because if the distractor is causing more stress, right? Like if it's causing more sympathetic
It can make it
upregulation,
worse.
it's going to make it worse. And that's what we see in a lot of premature ejaculators who try it themselves.
That's right. That's right. So the distraction needs to be something that they can either apply top down or that's literally right next to their penis, which is why this little electrical current probably works. And the electrical current, I mean, these guys go from ejaculating in 30 seconds to ejaculating in 5 or 6 minutes, right? Which is that's the mode intravaginal ejaculation latency is like 5 or 6 minutes. So they go into normal, right? They don't go beyond normal. But people also treat it with, with paroxetine or some SSRI that they give, which, is going to now do the I mean, to an individual that doesn't have this, they can become anorgasmic or anejaculatory, right? But to the person who's rapid, now they become, they can last 10 minutes.
We don't have paroxetine here in the US, which is sort of a shame, but other SSRIs. Let's talk about oxytocin. So I think that a lot of people's understanding of oxytocin is pretty rudimentary. It's the love hormone, it's the cuddle hormone. Let's talk about how oxytocin works in a sexual relationship and how that affects your relationship with that partner.
It's the cuddle hormone and love hormone, but it's also the truth hormone, right? Which I think people discovered quite by accident, where they get a couple together, give them oxytocin, and they have to problem solve. So it's not under sexual circumstance, but it's like a problem solving. Oh my God. It's like half the couples will start yelling and screaming at each other, right? And saying things to each other they never said before. Because now they feel like when you're close to somebody, you're also more open with somebody. And I think oxytocin is a pro-social hormone in all mammals because it's activating openness to a social circumstance or to a partnered social circumstance, right? So it doesn't just only make you want to cuddle. Sometimes it makes you want to like tell somebody off, right? So that can be problematic with it, which is probably why it's not really used as a nasal spray to put couples together, because it can also tear couples apart. But what it's doing when you're, again, moving from distal to proximal to interactive, like I was mentioning. So oxytocin from the paraventricular nucleus in the hypothalamus projects many places, but among the places it projects is to the same area that dopamine neurons are. And it's helping guide the dopamine system into the only analogy I have is it's personifying reward, right? I mean, if you think of what is a reward, right? It's a noun. It's a person, place, or thing. Okay, it's something, it's some place, or it's somebody. And if it's somebody, you have to be able to differentiate that individual as a person from a gold bar, right? I mean, the person can be really nice, but here's a gold bar. So what do you want, the somebody or the something? So how do you regulate that? And people have done this. They've done a lot of experiments in humans, like Danny Kahneman, for example, the guy that won the Nobel. He's done experiments in humans where they calculate the value of things, right? And one of the things that Danny showed was that the valuation has nothing to do with the market. It has everything to do with your mesolimbic dopamine system wanting something, even though the thing you want is ridiculous, like a Cabbage Patch Kid or a pet rock. Okay, but your kid needs a pet rock, so you damn well better go out and buy the pet rock because everybody's got a pet rock and your kid needs to have a pet rock. So valuation of a pet rock, which has no market value whatsoever, right, now has huge value because it's activating your mesolimbic dopamine system. So with oxytocin, the projections that go to the source of that, it's in the midbrain called the ventral tegmental area. When it goes in, it's changing what you attend to. It's making you pro-social, making you more open socially, but you're now moving toward the personification of reward rather than the reward coming from things. People have tried, with not much success, tried to treat like drug addiction, which is the thing addiction, with oxytocin antagonists. It's not great, but oxytocin antagonists have a profound effect, at least in rats, on things like partner preference as well as sexual partner preference. So I think it's not just dopamine, but it's dopamine as influenced by the things that are going to make you close to someone. Yeah. And the pattern of that closeness, which is different, for example, when you're with your baby than it is when you're with your partner. What's telling it that this is your partner? This is a thing to have sex with and a thing to feel intimate with in an adult sort of way. This is your baby. This is a thing to nurture. This is a thing to protect. This is a thing to, a person that you protect, that you nurture, that you love, that you care for, that you feed, that you do all this other stuff with. And those patterns are very different. The pattern of oxytocin release in a female rat who's a dam, who's a mom, right, is almost continuous because the nipple stimulation is actually inducing it, right? So it's almost like this continuous thing, right? Whereas the oxytocin you feel with a partner is phasic. So we know that's a difference. Now, whether that's because of, the descending parts of your cortex saying that's a baby, protect it, that's a lover, have sex with it, right? Mm-hmm. Those things are a little bit different, but maybe different enough that's why we all, not everybody's a pedophile, right? And not everybody's looking at their partner as if they have to mother their partner. I mean, some people do, right? Because the partner, you sort of bring this maternal instinct out, right? Whereas for other people, that's nothing that they would want to do. Yeah. So again, it's a different pattern of oxytocin release that makes you feel intimately close in one way with your child and intimately close in a very different way with your sex partner or your lover, husband, wife, whatever. The phasic tonic thing is interesting from that standpoint. What's actually inducing that from the cortex, from the insula that's here, from the anterior cingulate, because they both have projections there. The anterior cingulate, we call that paleocortex. So there's something, there's a different way that's structured, that input is structured, that produces these different kinds of release patterns.
So in terms of sexual relationships, obviously oxytocin is released after orgasm. So how does that affect bonding for people who are having casual sex or multiple sex partners? How does the brain sort of overregulate that oxytocin natural human tendency to bond? And is it different for men and women?
The last one is a really important question. I don't know that it is that different, but it may be regulated differently by a hormonal cycle versus a non-cycle, right? And I think maybe there is some differential regulation that way. But what its endpoint is really important. Stendhal, 1824, in De l'Amour, he wrote that, if the couple remains in this closeness, usually facial closeness, that they'll begin to get a sense of the other individual as their loved object, and that they would want to be with that loved object. And this is, of course, after the generative act. So this was cuddling after sex. So what happens when people don't cuddle after sex? Do they turn that system off? Or do they, fall in love with the interior of the Uber that they're riding home in because they've just had they've just swiped, left, and they've had a little encounter, and now they're going home when all of this beautiful neurochemical soup in their brain is trying to get them to cuddle, right? Or, and this is an interesting point, especially for people that have casual, on Tinder or Grindr, who have casual sex, you find that, that when they defy the laws of casuality, right, and they actually do cuddle, and they can't move, and they're both lying there together, to the point they fall asleep and they wake up the next morning. Well, now they have this awkward situation in which they're sharing breakfast and they seem to move over the hump because now they want to be with each other again. And more likely than not, that incident evolves them into a relationship. So it's like, okay, so now you're experiencing it together as opposed to apart. Right. So interestingly, when we did our first experiments with male rats with the conditioned sexual behaviors that they show where they had a female partner that was scented, if we pulled the female out right after ejaculation, they didn't form the partner preference. But if we let them stay with the female during his post-ejaculatory refractory period, it was like 5 minutes for a rat, right? Well, now even having one post-ejaculatory refractory period with the female there, yeah, he showed the partner preference. So there is something to what, for lack of a better term, I call it just post-orgasmic learning, that if you're in with the partner, you are learning about your partner. You're beginning to find your partner really attractive, and you're seeing things, and this is what Stendhal said, you're seeing things in the partner, what he called them new perfections. You're seeing new perfections in the partner. And I mean, what you're seeing are facial features, body, skin type, the feel of the skin, the feel of the face, the feel of the lips, all these things. And your brain puts it together as, that's my partner. Yeah, this is my partner now. That's my girlfriend. That's my boyfriend. That's my partner. That's mine. Mine, mine, mine. And, this is also something that oxytocin plays a role in, which is jealousy. And so if your partner goes away, that oxytocin dopamine interplay is now disrupted horribly, right? And you feel you can't just say, oh, okay, see ya. Like the Seinfeld episode where she wants to break up and he's like, oh, okay, no problem. Well, yeah, Jerry wasn't bonded. Okay. She might have been, but he wasn't at all. Right. So he could just say goodbye. So if that system isn't turned on and cuddling makes that happen, right, especially after the generative act, as Stendhal said, then it goes. It's just not there.
Are you feeling in a rut in the bedroom, wishing you had the kind of sex life you could brag about? I've spent years helping patients and creating content for people all around the world to improve and optimize their sex life. Today, you can get my knowledge for 100% free with my new ebook called Better Sex, Better Life. In this ebook, I review my top 10 tips for improving your sex life, all from the comfort of your own home. All you have to do is go to renamalikmd.com/morepleasure to download it for free today. It's their plasticity. So like in terms of you have multiple relationships, you try to bond over and over again, and it ends poorly in every circumstance, right? Or multiple circumstances, let's say 10, 15, 20 circumstances where you've had intercourse, maybe you've cuddled, maybe you haven't in half of them, right? Does that change your ability to then form that connection with the next person? Like, does your brain say, well, it's not working, so now I can't?
It could. And you could actually go through many more partners that way, right? Until it happens. So again, it's like, this kind of goes back to what we were talking about before. Are you doomed? I don't think you're doomed, because I think it will happen. I think, eventually you're going to be in a situation where it's just, you can't move. You're not going home. It's, 4:00 in the morning. You really want to sleep, and this person's there, and she's got her arms around you. You have your arms around her, and you're thinking, okay, this is weird. This is awkward. I shouldn't be here. I should be home. I want to wake up in my own bed. But no, I don't. I really want to be here with her. And so you let yourself do that. And now the game is completely different. You've, like playing Dungeons and Dragons. You've now gone over the abyss, boom, onto the other side. Now you got to deal with orcs, because you've never dealt with orcs before. It's a game changer. I think when that really does happen and people let it happen. And people say, well, it doesn't happen enough, right? But it's interesting to me that once they live together, sex is done, boom, they turn over and go to sleep, as opposed to maintaining the cuddle. I think people need to, again, it's like maintaining dating, or at least the mindset of dating. You need to maintain the cuddle.
Is there a certain amount of time? Like, is it like a couple minutes of cuddling? Is that enough? Like, is that, do we know?
I think nobody knows, but I think it just depends. I think if you could actually do research on this, which I don't know that anybody can, okay, unless they just think about it retrospectively, because you'd have to be there with the couple. You'd have to be there watching the couple,
Like a
and saying,
stopwatch, yeah.
Have a stopwatch and say, okay, after 2 minutes, okay, stop cuddling. Okay, and then after 4 minutes, okay, stop cuddling, and after 10 minutes, okay, stop cuddling, and see who feels better about their experience, right? Who feels closer to one another about their experience. I don't know. I for some reason I just started remembering my mom telling me that her mom back in the 1920s had literally a stopwatch, and they would only allow the baby to suckle for 2 minutes per breast.
Really?
That was the theory of the day, right? It's like 2 minutes per breast, and that's it. That's all baby gets. to regulate, so baby learns to regulate their intake and their output and blah, blah, blah. And I was thinking, but what if that's not enough time,
Yeah.
And I don't think about my mom. I think that probably wasn't enough time. And, this whole generation of kids, in her generation were restricted in their ability to really kind of melt into their mother while they're suckling and then fall asleep, you know, which is it's different now, thank God. But it's like, I wonder how much is enough. And is it different for different people? Is the amount of cuddling they need different, right? And will people get freaked out by it? Because some people do get freaked out by it. It's like, oh my God, they catch themselves. Oh my God, I'm falling in love. No, 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 no. This isn't going to happen. And they catch themselves and so they get up and they take a shower and leave and run away. So I wonder about that. Again, I don't think we're ever going to be able to test it.
I know, it's fascinating. And I also wonder if the intensity of the orgasm plays into how intense the oxytocin is released and how much more bonded or how quickly maybe you get bonded with the person.
The oxytocin effect is something I'm actually going to be looking at in rats, of course. I can vary the intensity of their orgasm or their orgasm-like responses by simply varying the level of arousal that they have. I have particular ways of doing that. I'm going to be doing that and trying to then see if we do get a greater opioid and oxytocin effect with orgasms that ride on high arousal relative to orgasms that ride on low arousal.
Do you have a hypothesis?
Oh, yeah. I know that when the orgasms ride on low arousal, we don't get partner preference. We don't get conditioned partner preference. And I know that I can block that conditioned partner preference like completely by giving them a drug that blocks opioid receptors. So the opioids are sensitizing dopamine. We know that from the drug addiction literature. They're also sensitizing oxytocin. We know that from the maternal bonding literature. So I think when opioids go up at orgasm, they're sensitizing dopamine and oxytocin. And the oxytocin release is also helping to now kind of shape and mold what dopamine is looking at as a motivational factor. I think if we lower the arousal level, we're just not going to get it.
That makes sense, right? I think that you can imagine that if you had a very intense orgasm with a partner, that you do feel a little more positive towards that person. But also, I wonder if you could, as a person, if you learned how to really induce arousal in your partner and you really wanted them to fall in love with you because you really love them, then you could essentially try to enhance arousal to get a better orgasmic response and a better oxytocin release.
I think 100 years ago, people did that by making each other wait,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
So, when you could finally really, you had to date, you had to court somebody. I mean, people were having sex for sure, but you had to court them. Like you had to really work at it, having social skills and, also bringing gifts. You had to do all sorts of stuff. And, it would start by going out, on a date with half her family there coming out with you. And, and you had no time to be alone and you really wanted to be alone. You both wanted to be alone and you couldn't. So now that made you want to be alone even more the next time. And eventually the family members would like not go out and finally you could go alone and then you could share a first kiss, which, must, if you want it so much, must be magical. It's like first kisses in high school, with your first girlfriend or boyfriend. It's like that. Oh my God. Like those things are just like incredibly magical. I think by making people wait for it, it increased the arousal. If you had to wait too long, you would probably just say, okay, this isn't working. And then you say, well, I'm going to have to terminate our our whatever budding relationship and go somewhere else. But if it hit, if it hit up to optimality, then things were really good. That first kiss could evolve into a second kiss and a third kiss and then a hug and then, all sorts of cool stuff.
This is a controversial question, but do you think sex positivity to some degree has hurt us in the ability to create those really strong bonds?
I would say no, because I think if you think sex positivity means quickness, yeah, it's not due to sex positivity. It's just due to, people wanting everything immediately, right? And not being able to
I
wait
guess
for
that's not
things.
the right question. I guess the question is
No,
like,
no, no,
do
no,
you
but
think, yeah, yeah,
it is the right question. I think because, keeping things, there's a balance between things being too easy and things being too hard. Okay. So if it's all over the place, like, I mean, think of North America, sex is everywhere. Okay. It's on the Buffalo Jeans ad. It's on this, it's on that, and, don't look at that, but you do because you surreptitiously look at it anyway. I think there's some weird balance between the two things that keeps the arousal level up. Being in a closet keeps the arousal level up because you're not supposed to do that thing, right? And people are closeted not just because of their sexual orientation. They're closeted in terms of what kind of sex they like, in terms of how they like it, in terms of, we as we discussed, right? So, in a way, everybody's in the closet until they come out. And, who are you going to come out with other than people that love you and your partner, right? Or that person that you're going to really fall in love with. Then you can come out with that person. But even then, not necessarily completely, right? Because the kink that you want may not be part of you coming out, right? But you could with a person that really cares deeply about you and is interested in like discovering your sexual landscape as much as you are interested in discovering it yourself, right? So you can go on that journey together. But I think that sex positivity doesn't have to make it too easy, because part of sex positivity is making it really good. And so if waiting for something or teasing one another, putting it off till tomorrow so that you want it even more, right? That's part of sex positivity. It's not just, oh, well, everything for everybody whenever they want it. It's like the immediate gratification that we now have on our cell phones. We're going to apply to our sex lives, right? So I got to have it quickly. No, not necessarily. That's quick is not necessarily good. As they say, good food takes time. Good sex takes time.
No, I just wonder if we're in a culture now where it is immediate, right? You go on a date, you expect that sex is on the menu for that, even the first date, where that was not the case when my parents were growing up. My parents grew up in India. They still did courting back then and arranged marriages, and they still do. But I think like it's different now, whereas I think that would never have been acceptable to be like, oh, sex is available on the first date, even in our parents' generation. And now it's very much acceptable and very common. And so like is that immediacy hurting us to some degree?
It's really hard to say because people have different amounts of arousal that they bring into something. So there may be some where sex on the first date, they ended up together forever, right? And have an amazing sex life. And then there are others, and probably more, who had sex on the first date who then, people tossed them, because you're too easy. You're too easy. There's two very different 4-letter words that start with an S that have to do with men who get it on the first date and women who give it on the first date. Okay. And the stud slut thing really, it pisses me off to no end, because like, what, the guy wasn't slutty either? Like, what are you saying? And she's not a stud? Maybe she is a stud. And why can't a woman be a stud? I remember having these arguments when I was an undergrad with people, and it's like, well, no, it's different. And it's like, why is it different? But then you start to think, well, for some people, yeah, waiting really helps them. It really clarifies exactly what they want.
Yeah, no, I mean, my point is it just allows for maybe more arousal, right? More arousal that, like, if you think about, still remember this. One of my colleagues in med school, he says, I love spring in New York. I trained in New York City. He goes, everyone's wearing skirts and like, it's just like you're seeing more skin and it's beautiful. I love spring in New York. And I feel like now, because of social media, because of online pornography, because of all these different things, like, that doesn't excite people as much anymore, right? Because they can see it all the time. So I think there's also like there's a different, as you said, that level is higher now to get to arousal for a lot of people.
I think they will get there. It may take them longer to get there because, in their 20s, everything might be really easy. And in their 30s, they might even almost self-impose a little bit of distance. Oh, I was this way in my 20s. I don't want that. It was the same thing every time, even though it was a different person. It was too easy. It was this. Or they're going to meet somebody who makes it more difficult for them, and who they know because they can read this person, because they've been looking at each other's eyes. All the signs are there. They want it. They should get it. They're not getting it. They're upset by not getting it. And now they're willing to spend more time with this individual to get it. But in the process of doing that, they also realize that now they're feeling romantic about this person. And they've gotten to know this person. They've gotten to know the mind of this individual. They've had talks that they're like, oh, I didn't think of that before. Holy shit, that's really cool. And they're getting this, now this much more integrated thing from this individual that they just didn't immediately go to bed with, right? Or have sex with. Again, I think it all depends. You can, what's that old adage that men learn to love the women they have sex with and women learn to love the sex with the men that they love, or I forget what it is, but something like that, right? And that shows the sex difference, but it also shows that it takes time for that to really develop. So I think if you think it's going to develop as quickly as swiping left or right, it never will. And I think you're right. I think that's why, spring is sprung, but people are like, if I don't get it on the first date, I'll just go home and masturbate. And okay, fine, you go home and masturbate, but you're probably going to be thinking about that person too, right? And so that's going to sensitize you over time to want it even more. So then so I think when people put you off, it's actually to your benefit to play the game. And say, the game is afoot. Now I can, I'm going to have to develop my social skills and not just my online skills, right?
Right. I hope so.
I think so. I'm pretty positive about it.
I hope so. Yeah. What is something else you're working on right now that you're excited about?
Today finished a grant on, which I really hope I get, is so all this conditioning. I can actually condition male rats to prefer females that wear an odor that is aversive. Now the odor is cadaverine. Okay, it's a polyamine that's given off by decaying flesh. I mean, it's not really necrophilia that I'm conditioning here, because if you anesthetize the females, even if they're in heat wearing cadaverine, the males won't go and mount them. So it's more like zombie sex, if I can think about it as a fetish. If I can condition something bad to be conditionally good, I condition something neutral to be conditionally good, and not just an odor. I mean, rats live in an olfactory world like we live in a visual world. So for them, it's smell is their dominant sense. But I can also condition, a somatosensory cue like a jacket, right? Not only on the individual, but on the partner, and get the same condition, get the same kind of thing. We're going to go into 8 different brain regions when they've been conditioned. And we're going to take those brain regions out, and we're going to assay them for genes that have been demethylated and ones that stay methylated, to try to get a sense of, well, okay, so is there a pattern to gene demethylation, gene activation, and then protein activation that's activating particular neurotransmitter systems in these brain parts that's now always happening, regardless of whether it's a neutral odor, an aversive odor, or a jacket? Are there ones that are always doing that? Because those become targets then for us to go in and inhibit and see if that knocks out the conditioning. Yeah, I know I can knock out the conditioning with naloxone and naltrexone, which are opioid antagonists. I can also knock it out with a demethylase inhibitor, so a drug that actually prevents kind of the untwisting of, genes are always wrapped tightly around histones, and when you activate them, you kind of take them off the histones, right, through demethylation, because when they're methylated, they're tight around the histones, and when they're demethylated, now they're out and semi-linear, and so polymerase can go and activate them. So I'm wondering if that inhibits the conditioning, which it does, then there's something about that demethylation which would be linked to the system that mu opioid receptors are activating. So I've already got possible candidates in my head, but we're going to see if in different brain regions they're different, or if there's a commonality. And if there is a commonality, then we potentially have a way to treat paraphilias, which wouldn't involve globally deactivating their motivational systems, right? But would involve deactivating the things that are specifically activated by sexual conditioning. So I think, obviously we have to do this in rats, but if it really works, it's going to be, I think it's going to move us forward quite a bit in terms of being able to target things like pedophilia and get them just not to feel it anymore, which could be really important, while we're training them to feel it for age appropriate partners. you could kind of untrain it for that. That could be really interesting.
So we end our podcast with questions we ask everybody. And it doesn't have to be about your work. It can be about anything. What is something you know now in life that you wish you knew earlier?
I think everything we've been talking about today. I mean, really, I started this trek by trying to figure out why orgasms feel good. Because my first one was like a big one. Like, what the hell just happened to me? Like, I didn't know, right? I mean, I think I wish I could go back and tell my teenage self not to worry so much, that everything does turn out, like even the bad things that happen to you in life, that you just have to live through them and develop a thick skin. Like Konrad Adenauer said, was a gift from God. You just develop that thick skin and be able to move on. And I really wish I'd known that as a younger individual, because I wouldn't have worried nearly as much as I did.
Maybe we had to all go through that though, I think, when you're younger. It's part of growing up, right? What's a non-negotiable, something you have to do every single day?
Oh, this is going to sound really funny. I have to make the bed.
Okay. Okay.
I really have to make the bed. And it's like, it's my girlfriend doesn't, she doesn't care about it, but I do. There's something about making the bed in the morning that just sets me up for the rest of the day. And if the bed's not made, I feel like, something gnaws at me and it's missing. I have to make the freaking bed.
What's a life hack or a health hack you'd share with us?
Not to be sedentary. Like, don't sit all the time. Like, always move, always be doing stuff. Use public transportation, walk, ride a bike. Like, always be working out, because it's easy to not do that when you're young and retain everything. But as you get older, if you don't do it, it's going to be a real problem. And then it's harder and harder and harder to get into. So I think just always maintaining an active lifestyle and maintaining, I don't know, just being young in your heart, discovering things, following your passion keeps you active, and it keeps you young.
So last question is, if you couldn't be a neuroscientist, what would you do with your life?
Okay, that was a question that I asked myself when I was 24, because was I going to stay playing guitar in a punk band in DC, or was I going to go to Vancouver and go to grad school? And it wasn't a coin toss, because I realized that what I could do in my basement was play guitar in a punk band, but I couldn't do rat research on sexual behavior in my basement. That's where I made that decision, right? Probably it would be being a musician.
Cool. Very cool. Where can people find more about you?
That's a good question. I mean, I'm on Facebook. I'm on, if you just put my name in a Google search, you'll find a whole bunch of things about me, but it's like, and some of them are not all that good, but you'll find what I do, where I'm at. And of course, there's always something about my research that's on there, both in terms of Charles University and the psychology, and also in terms of the Czech National Mental Health Center. So if they look those up, they're going to find me. And yeah, there's just all sorts of stuff about me out there, which is interesting. Again, some of it's funny, some of it's not so funny, but it's life.
Cool. Well, thank you so much for your time. This was a great conversation.
Oh, thank you, Rena. This is great. Thanks for having me.
Thanks so much for joining me on today's episode of the Rena Malik MD podcast. If you are enjoying the podcast, do me a solid favor. Leave me a rating or review on iTunes or Spotify. This is zero cost and a great way to support the podcast. And as always, remember to take care of yourself, because you're worth it.